recorded vote on Amendment Number 3 printed in Part A of the House Report 113-215 by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Napolitano, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed in a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in Part A of House Report Number 113-215, offered by Mrs. Napolitano of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
And this should be the last recorded vote of the day in the House. Earlier, they debated a bill that authorizes a land swap between the federal government and Resolution Copper involving land tracts in Arizona. This is an amendment by Democrat Grace Napolitano of California, which would require that nothing in the bill may affect water quality and the availability of water. And that'll do it for legislative work this afternoon in the House. The Senate, meanwhile, continues debate on the continuing resolution funding the federal government past the end of the fiscal year, which is Monday, September the 30th. Yesterday, Majority Leader Harry Reid invoked cloture, filed a motion for cloture on the bill and offered an amendment to the House bill that would shorten the House bill by 2 months to November 15th and would strip out the health care defunding language and the debt prioritization language that's in the House CR. You can follow the Senate debate, of course, over on C-SPAN 2.
Ms. Eshoo.
All members vote. Any member wishing to change their vote?
Ms. Eshoo votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 191, the nays are 217. The amendment is not adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee do now rise.
The question is the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Okay. The bad news is up. So as quickly as you can get me out. Mr. Chairman.
Come on. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has under consideration H.R. 687, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration H.R. 687 and has come to no resolution thereon. This is the gentlewoman from California seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask unanimous consent that Mr. Bacchus be removed as a co-sponsor to H.R. 2914.
Without objection.
And I would also like unanimous consent that Ms. Jackson Lee be removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 2914.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
Senate 793, an act to support revitalization and reform of the Organization of American States and for other purposes.
House to be in order. Members, please remove your conversations from the floor. House will be in order. Please remove your conversations from the floor. The chair is now prepared to entertain a one-minute request. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska arise? The House will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized. The House will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor. Nebraska is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many Americans are bewildered as to what is happening in Washington, and understandably so. But really the goal is pretty simple. We do need to keep this government running while also protecting Americans from the harmful effects of the new health care law known as Obamacare. Until now, the debate over health care has been largely in the abstract, but now many Americans are recognizing just how hurtful this is. Mr. Speaker, we need the right type of health care reform, but we don't need skyrocketing premiums or plans that erode health care liberties. Mr. Speaker, Yvonne just wrote to me from Nebraska. She said this: for her family of 5, their monthly insurance premiums are going to nearly double. She asked, how can we call this the Affordable Care Act? Rodney just wrote to me. He's a self-employed truck driver. He told me he may have to sell his truck just to afford the insurance. Mr. Speaker, since parts of this law have already been delayed, isn't it only fair that we delay the entire implementation for at least a year, giving us time to create the right type of health care reform, one that reduces cost and improves health care outcomes while also protecting the vulnerable in our society? That's what Americans deserve.
Yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection. The House will be in order.
Mr. Speaker, I recently met with a passionate group of constituents from Rhode Island who told me of their family's struggle with pancreatic cancer. In particular, Katie Boucher recently recounted her story of her mother, Marie Boucher, who was diagnosed in 2008 and passed away just a year later in 2009 at the age of 59. Her story resonated with me not only because my own grandfather battled pancreatic cancer and ultimately passed away from the disease, but because an estimated 45,000 people were diagnosed with this illness in 2013 alone. Despite great advancements in medical science, we are still woefully behind the mark when it comes to pancreatic cancer. To make matters worse, the budgetary impacts of sequestration are forcing cutbacks at the National Institutes of Health, which is responsible for funding much of the biomedical research across the country. Mr. Speaker, we can achieve deficit reduction without sacrificing the vital research that not only drives better health outcomes, but also drives our local economies. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to join me in urging stronger funding for NIH and a stronger focus on biomedical research, not just for Marie Boucher and her daughter, but for the thousands of people who are fighting for their lives in every single district across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
To revise and extend my remarks and address the House.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to take a minute today to recognize a remarkable South Florida organization, the Puerto Rican Bar Association of Florida, that will soon be celebrating its 10th year anniversary in Miami. Over the past 10 years, the association has been dedicated to public service in my home state of Florida, preserving the civil rights, the political rights, and responsibilities of Puerto Ricans as Americans, as well as Floridians. The Puerto Rican Bar Association of Florida also serves as an educational tool for undergraduate, graduate, and law students through a moot court competition which will be held this year in conjunction with the association's historic anniversary. I congratulate its president, Richard Robles, for his impressive work and wish everyone in the association continued success on behalf of the Puerto Rican community of Florida. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition? Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The American people have been bombarded on their TV screens by this creepy image of Uncle Sam appearing between a young woman's legs. This ad is funded by the idealistic-sounding Generation Opportunity. But guess who's really behind this ad? The not-so-idealistic Koch brothers, who are spending a share of their wealth to tell people not to get health insurance. Their sole purpose is to keep young people from getting quality, affordable care, and in doing so, they hope to destroy the Affordable Care Act. But what would Koch Care look like? Insurance companies could deny you coverage because of a pre-existing condition. You could be thrown into bankruptcy because of lifetime caps. Insurance companies would be able to charge women more than men, and tens of millions of Americans would be without health insurance. Oh, and Uncle Sam would be standing between a woman and her doctor when it comes to reproductive health, just like you see the GOP trying to do across the country. That's what the GOP and the Koch brothers want. Fewer options, less health care, and higher costs. That certainly doesn't seem like an opportunity for a generation to me. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, we in Congress have a responsibility to ensure taxpayer dollars are used wisely. No federal department should get a free pass, especially one responsible for managing over 50% of all annual discretionary spending. The law requires all federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, to present audible financial statements to Congress. Unfortunately, it has been over 16 years and the Pentagon has yet to comply with this law. How can we be expected to oversee the Pentagon's spending habits when we have no confidence in the numbers the DoD is presenting? My Audit the Pentagon Act presents a carrot-and-stick approach to addressing this issue. It gives the DoD additional transfer authority if it receives a clean audit, allowing it greater flexibility to program funds among accounts. Failure to achieve a clean audit results in serious consequences. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, which improves fiscal accountability and oversight of the Pentagon's budget process. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition? Does any member seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are seeing significant natural disasters this month, from the historic floods that are wreaking havoc across Colorado to the third largest wildfire in California's history, the Rim Fire, in and around Yosemite National Park. These disasters have taken lives, they've driven families from their homes, and it will take years and many, many millions of dollars to clean up and repair all of the damage. Yes, these are natural disasters, but that doesn't mean that we aren't culpable. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as well as the British Meteorological Office, found in a recent study that for at least half of last year's worst weather events, human activities made them more likely and more severe. Specifically, human-influenced climate change had an effect on Superstorm Sandy, heat waves in the United States, and drought in Europe. But the climate deniers in Congress continue to ignore what's happening right in front of our eyes. We must get beyond extreme politics and start addressing the extreme damage of climate change. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday Fox News reported that massive amounts of highly sensitive U.S. military equipment has been stolen in Libya by militia groups alleged and aligned with terrorists. These new developments, along with earlier reports that hundreds of surface-to-air missiles may have been stolen around the time of the Benghazi attack, beg the question, just what has the U.S. been doing in Benghazi and around Libya over the last year? And today, the State Department's Inspector General issued a new report criticizing the Department for failing to take any meaningful steps to improve diplomatic security at high-risk posts, like the facility attacked in Benghazi over the last year. That is why, Mr. Speaker, a select committee is needed now more than ever. not just to investigate the attack in Benghazi, but also to answer the question about U.S. operations in Libya involving stolen weapons and arms transfers over the last year. 177 members have co-sponsored H-Res 36 to create a select committee. Without a select committee, we're never going to know what happened in Benghazi.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Motion to address the House provides the amount of rights.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obamacare, as it has been affectionately called, was intended to do two things. Number one, make health care more affordable. Number two, make it more accessible, pure and simple. So let's talk about that. Does anyone know anybody whose premium has gone down? My daughter's 30 years old, very healthy. Her premium went up from $170 a month to $270 a month. I speak to businesses all the time who have had 25, 35, 40% premium increases. Now, my telephone number in my office is 202-225-5831. If your premium has gone down, I would like to know about it. The second thing Obamacare was meant to do is make health care more accessible. In Georgia, we have two Fortune 500 companies. One has announced that it will no longer be covering the spouses of 15,000 employees. The other one announced that 20,000 part-time employees would no longer be covered under their health care. So I don't know of any example where accessibility has increased for the average person. 0 for 2. Higher costs and less access. Let's repeal Obamacare. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota seek recognition?
For unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and permission to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about a very important issue that isn't one that is just typical for my district or any other member's district. This is a very unique time in American history because next week every American in the United States will be subject to the new requirements, the new mandates of Obamacare. This is a time that's very important, and we need to focus on what's about to happen next week. And we have an opportunity in the next few days to keep misery and suffering from millions of Americans. The Republicans have been ridiculed by the Democrats, saying that we want to somehow shut down government. We don't. It's curious to note that since the 1970s, the federal government has been shut down. It's been shut down 17 times, and numerous times because the Democrat Party sought to shut it down. If you go back to the 1970s, the Democrats repeatedly tried to shut down the government over the issue of abortion. What we're talking about is the issue of preventing suffering and misery for Americans. Surely that's worth a conversation, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the Founding Fathers created this magnificent institution to protect our liberty. The purpose of the House, the Senate, the entire federal government was created to protect our liberty. And House Republicans are united in our opposition to Obamacare because it is one of the most massive intrusions into the individual privacy of Americans that the federal government's ever attempted. It's an attempt to socialize the greatest health care system the world has ever seen, and we will see intrusions into the private lives of Americans on a level of scale never seen before. So I just want to reassure the American people that we are united as conservatives, as constitutional conservatives, to do everything in our power to repeal, defund, delay, do whatever it takes to stop the socialization of American medicine and the destruction of the most important right we have as Americans, to be left alone.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, as we approach the 1st of October, when everyone in this country is going to have an opportunity to have health insurance, you know that there are some people who always like the status quo, and they will say anything and do anything, the public is today being subjected to a propaganda campaign, the likes of which we have never seen in this country, against Obamacare. Somehow it is the worst thing that ever happened. The sky is going to fall. The world is going to end as we have known it. We should run and pray that in the latter days we will be saved. Now, the fact is that Obamacare is going to go into effect. The Supreme Court's looked at it, said it's constitutional. It's going to happen, folks. Will there be a few problems? Of course. You can't make a change in bringing 30 million people into a program without having a problem here and there. Some of the complaints I hear on the other side are from people saying, oh, it's going to do this, it's going to do that, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. But they didn't want to make one single change to make it better. We should just be calm.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor Linda Lunsford, a lifelong resident of Murray County, Georgia. Ms. Lunsford has been a dedicated teacher to the students of Murray County, helping to enrich the lives of the young people, both inside and outside of her classroom. It was in 1968 that Ms. Lunsford returned to Murray County High School as an English teacher. And over those next 30 years, and for many years after her retirement in 1998, she devoted herself to teaching young Georgians, helping them value their education and succeed in life. During her teaching career, she served as a drama sponsor, a Scholars Bowl sponsor, yearbook advisor, cheerleading sponsor, newspaper advisor, and much, much more. Ms. Lunsford has made such an impact on her community that Murray County is declaring October 5th, 2013, the first Linda Lunsford Day. So, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the 14th Congressional District of Georgia, I join in celebrating October 5th as Linda Lunsford Day and thank her for her many contributions to our community in Georgia.
The gentleman yields back. Are there any other 1-minute requests? Under the Speaker's announced policy on January 3rd, 2013, the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Sinema, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. September is Suicide Prevention Month, a time for our nation to raise awareness about the persistent scourge of suicide. Tens of thousands of Americans die each year purposefully by their own actions. They are neighbors and our friends. They are our sons and our daughters. And too often, they are the men and women who have served our country honorably in the United States military. An estimated 22 veterans commit suicide every day in our country. That's one life lost every 65 minutes. We've assembled today's special order to accomplish 3 things. First, we seek to demonstrate our continuing support for the individuals, organizations, and agencies whose efforts in addressing this preventable epidemic continue in the face of difficulty. Second, we are here to challenge the VA, the Department of Defense, and our fellow lawmakers to do more. The number of veteran deaths by suicide is increasing despite current efforts. Clearly, what we are doing now isn't working. We are failing in our obligation to do right by those who have served so honorably. And finally, we send a message to military families who have experienced this tragedy. To grieving families across America, know that your family's loss isn't forgotten. We are working to stop this epidemic and prevent future suicides. We work for the memory of your loved ones and for the prevention of future losses. My colleagues here today believe, as I believe, that no one who comes home after serving our country should ever feel they have nowhere to turn. Sadly, many of our young vets feel just that. Earlier this year, a young veteran in my district committed suicide. Daniel Summers was an Army veteran of 2 tours in Iraq. He served on Task Force Lightning, an intelligence unit. He ran over 400 combat missions as a machine gunner in the turret of a Humvee. Part of his role required him to interrogate dozens of terrorist suspects, and his work was deemed classified. Like many veterans, Daniel was haunted by the war when he returned. He suffered from flashbacks, nightmares, depression, and additional symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, made worse by a traumatic brain injury. Daniel needed help. He and his family asked for help the best way they knew how. Unfortunately, the VA enrolled Daniel in group therapy sessions instead of connecting him with a private counselor or therapist where he would be able to talk confidentially about his experiences. He attended the VA group sessions even though he knew, due to the classified nature of his work, that he could not fully share what gave him nightmares. Like many, Daniel's isolation got worse when he transitioned home to civilian life. He tried to provide for his family, but he was unable to work due to his disability. Daniel struggled with the VA bureaucracy. His disability appeal had been pending for over 2 years in the system without any resolution. Daniel didn't get the help he needed in time. On June 10th of 2013, Daniel wrote a letter to his family. It begins, "I am sorry that it has come to this. The fact is, for as long as I can remember, my motivation for getting up each day has been so that you would not have to bury me. As things have continued to get worse, it has become clear that this alone is not a sufficient reason to carry on. The fact is, I am not getting better, I am not going to get better, and I will most certainly deteriorate further as time goes on. From a logical standpoint, it is better to simply end things quickly and let any repercussions from that play out in the short term, rather than drag things out into the long term." He goes on to say, "I am left with basically nothing. Too trapped in a war to be at peace, too damaged to be at war, abandoned by those who would take the easy route, and a liability to those who stick it out and thus deserve better. So you see, not only am I better off dead, but the world is better without me in it. This is what brought me to my actual final mission." Daniel's parents, Howard and Jean, were devastated. But in the midst of their pain, they bravely shared Daniel's story and created a mission of their own. Their mission is to ensure that Daniel's story brings light to America's deadliest war, the 22 veterans that we lose every day to suicide. I am grateful to Howard and Jean for their courage and their strength, but we cannot leave this great task to Howard and Jean alone. The rest of the country must stand and join Howard and Jean in their work to prevent suicide. Each of us can do something to raise awareness, to be that light for a struggling veteran in our community. Businesses can display signs like this one to let veterans know that help is always available. Mental health professionals can volunteer with organizations like Give an Hour to provide free counseling to veterans and their families. And we can all learn to recognize the signs of crisis by visiting veteranscrisisline.net and then reaching out to the vets in our lives. Here in Congress, we too can do more. We need a VA that provides real and meaningful help to veterans in need. We who enjoy freedom every day, thanks to the sacrifices of our military service members, we must all step up to end the epidemic of veteran suicide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now I yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Congressman Dan Benishek.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague from Arizona for doing this special order today. This is an issue that's very close to me as well. And I want to join the rest of my colleagues here today and recognize September as the Veteran Suicide Prevention Month. As my colleague mentioned, a veteran in this country commits suicide every 65 minutes. That's 22 lives extinguished every day. As the father of a veteran, as a doctor that's worked at the VA hospital in northern Michigan for over 20 years, and as the chairman of the Health Subcommittee on Veteran Affairs, I know that the challenges of military life do not end once our service members retire from active duty. The mental wounds of war may be invisible, but no less real to the young men and women suffering from them. Facing high unemployment rates, the stigma of post-traumatic stress disorder, and the loss of military fellowship, returning veterans often face a crisis of confidence the very moment they should feel nothing but relief and rest. This year we will bring 34,000 troops home from Afghanistan. The President has indicated he may withdraw all of the 63,000 members strong force by the end of 2014. The time to act to address this epidemic of veteran suicide is now. I am pleased that the VA leadership has made veteran suicide a priority. New programs putting research to work on reviewing health records for suicide risk factors is one example of the important steps that are being taken. But more, much more, needs to be done. We cannot and we will not allow 22 suicides a day to become the new normal. As friends and families of our veterans and those serving our country, there are some things we all can do. We can work to recognize the symptoms that could indicate serious problems and identify where and how to get assistance when we need it. To all veterans who are struggling to whether to take their own life, know that there is no shame in asking for help. You are not broken, and God has not forgotten you. You volunteered to go to war for us, and we have failed to provide you adequate support when you returned home. That is changing, and I beg you to reach out to your local VA, Veterans Center, Veteran Service Organizations, or local member of Congress for help. Together, we can begin to turn the tide on veteran suicide. Everyone can help fight this epidemic and be there for those that were there for us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Benishek. I appreciate your words very much. Our next speaker who will join us this afternoon is my colleague from Florida, Congressman Patrick Murphy. I yield to him.
First of all, I'd like to thank the gentlelady from Arizona for bringing us all together for this very important issue. And I stand in support of my colleagues that are here today to support our brave men and women of the United States military who are willing to give life and limb in service of our great nation. Those who fought for our freedom have earned America's gratitude and support as they re-enter society after the trauma of serving in prolonged war zones. Our nation must remain focused on the health and well-being of the brave men and women who have served. This means treating even the wounds that are not visible. September is Suicide Prevention Month, and it is incumbent that every one of us takes the time to reach out to service members and veterans that may be struggling. It should shake every member of this body to know that we lose 22 heroes every day to suicide. Yesterday, I was honored to join with local veteran groups to bring attention to this troubling issue. I want to take this opportunity to thank Mary Hinton with the Renewal Coalition, Dr. Deepak Mandy with the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center, and Dr. Raul Diaz with the Jupiter Veteran Center for not only joining me at this important event yesterday, but for the important work they are doing to assist the veterans and their families in our community every day. I also want to recognize the great work of the Veterans Crisis Line, which has fielded over 890,000 calls since 2007 and provides important, comprehensive mental health care at VA medical centers across the nation. I also want to thank Lynn Zimoniak for her hard work and dedication with Angel Fire, another organization in my district which helps our wounded veterans transition back to civilian life. For Suicide Prevention Month, let's recommit ourselves to providing our heroes who have sacrificed so much for our nation with the respect, the benefits, and the care that they have earned through their service by raising awareness, ending the stigma, and treating their invisible wounds. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I will now yield to another colleague from the great state of Florida, Mr. Ted Yoho.
I thank my colleague from Arizona for putting this together. New Mexico, I'm sorry. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak about the epidemic of veterans who not only commit but consider suicide. And again, I want to quote what my colleague talked about, the quote of "too trapped in war to be at peace, too damaged to be at war. And these are the words left behind by that soldier, Daniel, who tragically took his own life a few months ago. And Daniel is one of many who are affected by PTSD and who come back from war with suicidal thoughts. This is an epidemic among our servicemen and women, and it must be stopped. And it's estimated that, again, more than 22 veterans take their life each day. And that's 30% of all veterans have considered suicide. And in Florida's 3rd Congressional District alone, there are over 120,000 veterans, which according to current data means that's about 36,000 veterans in my district that have thought about suicide. And this is unacceptable, and we must remedy this. We need to do all we can for those that have sacrificed the most for our nation, and that cannot just extend to the battlefield. We must continue to take care of our soldiers when they come back home. That includes setting up programs to help veterans deal with PTSD and other psychological issues and get that proper help that they need. We have to make veteran suicide prevention a priority, and I, along with my colleagues, will work tirelessly towards that end. George Washington said, "To judge a nation's future military force and loyalty to that nation's military will be determined on how well that nation takes care of their veterans." And before our nation engages in another war, I hope we look at the true cost of that war. If we look at the cost of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's not just the trillions of dollars or the thousands of lives that have been lost, but the true cost of that war will be felt by this nation for the next 60, 70, 80 years. And we need to make sure that we take care of those veterans and we think long and hard before we ever do that again. Mr. Speaker, I yield back, and I thank my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Yoho. Next, I'd like to yield time to the distinguished Congresswoman from Illinois, a proud veteran herself, Representative Tammy Duckworth.
I thank the gentle lady from Arizona for pulling us together on this incredibly important issue. Our veterans, throughout their military career, are taught to be physically tough and mentally strong. And just because they suffer from post-traumatic stress does not negate that. They deserve every opportunity to achieve the same American dream that they defended for the rest of us. Yet, unfortunately, too many of our veterans suffer from post-traumatic stress or are the mental injuries resulting from their service. Post-traumatic stress and mental injuries are not always the result of combat, but can also include such trauma as that of sexual assault. Regardless of how the trauma is suffered, we still must take care of our veterans. We cannot allow these injuries to prevent them from living the lives that they deserve. And in some cases, these injuries have led these brave men and women to taking their own lives. It's been almost 8 years since my own injury, and in that time, if the 22 suicides a day rate were counted, there have been at least 24,000 veteran suicides. This is simply unacceptable. When I was director of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, one of the very first things that I did was to create a 24/7 hotline for mental health available for vets. We have one now across the nation, and that telephone number is 1-888-273-TALK. 888-273-TALK. Please put that on your refrigerator doors. You never know when that number could save a life. You know, we started that hotline because caring for our veterans and their mental well-being is not a secondary priority. It is a mission that we must pursue each and every day. We cannot rest until we end veteran suicide in our nation. We need to care for these warriors' invisible wounds with as much dedication and as much resources as we do their other combat injuries. Yet, because they are invisible, we often overlook these wounds. I am asking all levels of government, business, and ordinary citizens to make preventing veteran suicide our mission. We must come together and reduce the stigma of post-traumatic stress. We must provide the funding and the support that our heroes need. They fought for us. Now it is time for us to fight for them. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Duckworth. I'll now yield to another fine colleague from the great state of Illinois, Representative Rodney Davis.
Thank you to the gentlelady from Arizona for putting this special order together. It is a true privilege to stand here to highlight an issue that needs to be dealt with here in America. Our veterans are those who have protected our freedoms that allow us to stand on this floor and debate the issues of the day. Without their sacrifices, we wouldn't have the America that we know today. I'm surprised when I read the statistics about veteran suicide. The number who die by their own hands each year is greater than the official number of all U.S. war deaths in more than a decade of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. Between 2005 and 2011, over 49,000 veterans have taken their lives, and more than 69% of all veteran suicides were among those 50 and older. And nearly 1 in 5 suicides nationally is a veteran, even though veterans only make up 10% of the U.S. population. We need to take steps to ensure that our veterans have the mental health resources they need. We need to make sure that we raise awareness and do away with the stigma of suicide so that veterans feel comfortable finally reaching out for help. And when soldiers are scared to come forward about their mental health problems because they think they will be labeled a coward, they continue down a dark and lonely path that eventually could lead to suicide. Instead, we need to ask our struggling veterans to ask for help. As my colleague from Illinois just mentioned, the Department of Veterans Affairs launched a crisis line that since 2007 has answered more than 890,000 calls and has made over 30,000 rescues. In 2009, they added a chat line for texts, and over 108,000 texts have been sent. These are the types of resources that we need to provide those who have provided so much protection and freedom for us here in America. And I stand here today to work with my colleagues across the aisle to make things happen. Thank you again to the gentlelady from Arizona, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I'll now yield to my colleague from the great state of California, Susan Davis.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to join with my colleague from Arizona, Congresswoman Sinema, to talk about the issue of veteran suicide today, and to do it really from a personal perspective here as well. Daniel Summers, as the Congresswoman noted, was a talented young man, a decorated war hero, and a proud soldier. He asked for help. He did. He reached out to the VA in hopes of being admitted to their suicide prevention unit, but he was informed at that time that there was no inpatient availability, no appointments that he could get right away. And we know now that Daniel took his life just a few days later. His case was brought home to me because his parents, Jean and Howard Summers, live in my former district and actually were friends of mine and friends of people that I knew. When I first heard the story, I was taken, as anybody would be, by their grief, by what had happened, and the fact that we just cannot let that happen again. I think they asked the question that we all ask. How can a young man like that fall through the cracks? How come it was that people didn't respond to him? How can we make a promise to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, when we cannot guarantee placement in a suicide prevention treatment center? Well, one thing I think that we all learn from this is that we have to listen to our constituents. And what I have found to be so rewarding really is that parents with this kind of grief can work through that, and using their son's words to become strong advocates for what is needed in the system. I know, having served on the personnel committees, it was very important to me to work through this issue for a number of years, and we know of the many causes of suicide among those who have served in the military. We know that some of them, in fact, the major reasons, are not necessarily combat stress. Recent reports have shown us that financial hardship and relationship strife are major causes of suicide among the military. But it points out to us how critically important this discussion of mental health is in our country. Sometimes I feel like we've arrived a bit and we plan. I know agencies throughout our country and throughout the VA plan so hard that these kinds of tragedies do not occur. But they do occur, no matter how hard the effort is. And we have got to redouble those efforts. We have got to listen. And we have got to encourage our families to do what they can and what they think is right. I actually think that one of the reasons that the Summers family have become such strong advocates is because people did respond to them. They didn't push them aside and say, well, you know, this is a terrible story and we're sad that it happened. And we're not sure that we can do anything about it. We can do something about it, and we will. And I thank my colleague for bringing this forward, and I thank the Summers family as well.
Congresswoman Davis. I now yield to my colleague from Washington State, Congressman Jim McDermott.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, members, I applaud my colleague from Arizona for bringing this issue to the floor. 45 years ago, I was a part of another era when there was a draft. And everybody was subject to that draft. And in 1975, we stopped that draft. And we changed the nature of our military. We made it an all-voluntary military. What we've done in this country is we've taken 1% of the people and said, you volunteered for this, you go and do this for us. And we buy the guns and the bullets and everything else and send them out there, and when they come back, we don't know them. There's a fascinating book called Breach of Trust by a man named Andrew Basovich. He's a colonel in the United States Army. He lost a son in Iraq. And he has written an incisive account of what the problem today is. The subtitle is How Americans Failed Their Soldiers and Their Country. Now, when they return from war, I know about PTSD because I dealt with it as a psychiatrist with people coming back from Vietnam. The kids that were in Apocalypse Now were the kids that came to my clinic. So I saw what people who went through tough war was all about. And what is happening today, in fact, we do it here on this floor, and I'm always uneasy when we do it. We stand up when we have a moment of silence. Well, that's nice, and, you know, we should do it, and we do it. And we thank people for their service. Every veteran finds that as hollow because they didn't go and get us a cup of coffee. They were under orders to go and kill people. And they did it on our behalf. And we bear the responsibility for sending them out there to do it. Everyone on this floor, all 435 of us, bear the responsibility, as does the American public. And when we receive them back, what do they get? Homelessness, joblessness. They get PTSD that may or may not be treated. We say, oh, well, the Veterans Administration will take care of that. You can't put it off on the Veterans Administration. It is all our responsibility. Sexual assault. The number of sexual assaults, you can see a movie called The Hidden War about what happens to women who are now serving in the military. You can look at the total brain injury. Kids who could do all kinds of things come back and can't remember their phone number. They can't remember what their house address is. And they are suffering from things that have happened to them because of the war that they've been involved with. And what happens to them is they get isolated. They get isolated feeling nobody really understands what's going on with me. And for some, suicide seems like the only way. Now, Native American tribes, more ancient people, understood this, that when they sent warriors out to war, They received them back into the tribe. The samurai did it. There was a whole process by which we brought people back in and cleansed them of the guilt of what they've done on our behalf. That collateral damage you read about or hear about is our responsibility as well as theirs for having actually pulled the trigger. We sent them and they did it on our behalf. We cannot get away from that. And we have put a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act that will create a commission for high-level people to look at how we bring these people back. And it's more than just fixing the process at the VA. That's not enough. There is a much larger process of getting us to accept what we are sending people to do. This recent brush we had with Syria, we were about to send people down there to kill people all over the place and say, well, it was the Air Force that did it. I didn't direct the smart bomb to go in there. Yes, you did. Yes, I did. Yes, all of us did. And so when we talk about suicide and these isolated young men and women who come back and feel there's no other hope, it is a much bigger issue. It's an issue of getting them to come and talk to us and tell us what they've done and accept, as we accept, the grief from that kind of event. I thank you for the time, and I encourage you to read the book, Breach of Trust.
Thank you, Congressman. I now will yield to a distinguished colleague from California, Congressman Tony Cardenas.
I'd like to first thank Congresswoman Sinema for bringing us together so we can speak for at least an hour on this very critical and important issue of supporting our veterans now that they're home. This is something that I shouldn't have to talk about. This is something that none of us should have to bring up, but here we are. Too many of our veterans are taking their own lives. Our soldiers and veterans who are all volunteers should not be killing themselves. Too many are, and it is at an epidemic rate. This is entirely unacceptable. While veteran suicide is frequently reported in the press and focused on by the VA, it is rarely mentioned that last year 349 active duty servicemen and women killed themselves. That is more active duty deaths by suicide than in all combat deaths combined during the same year, 2012, including the deaths in Afghanistan. Alongside our active duty forces, nearly 24 veterans kill themselves every day. That's almost one every hour. That number is going up, not down. A survey by the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America showed that 30% of service members have considered taking their own life, and 45% said they know an Iraq or Afghanistan veteran who has attempted suicide. The Department of Veterans Affairs has devoted some resources to this effort, but more can be done, and it starts right here in Congress. We fund the VA. The VA does not fund itself. It is important that we let military families know that those who have experienced these tragedies, that their experiences matter. We need to provide resources, real support for our veterans and their families. We owe this to the men and women who kept their promise to protect and serve our nation, because we now know and we can see that constant mobilization and combat does not just impact our nation as a whole, but it forever impacts our men and women to whom we owe so much. This Suicide Prevention Month, let us make a true effort to provide mental health support for our veterans and their families. Over $1 trillion have been provided and spent on 2 wars over the last decade. Yet we have dedicated too little, very little, to help our veterans when they return home. $1 trillion sounds like a lot of money. Almost 1 veteran an hour in this country takes his or her life. What's that price, ladies and gentlemen? What's that value? I believe that we have a backward system in our country where we can pop off and
25 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion, and it keeps going and going and going. And we're creating more and more veterans who come back and who love their country. They would like to come back and feel normal, but they don't feel right. And because of that, they take their life. And we should be ashamed of ourselves because we have the answers. We know the answers. And one of those answers is for Congress to dedicate more money to our veterans so that when they come home, they won't take their life. We have the answers, ladies and gentlemen, but we're not willing to heed the call. We need to do so. Perhaps what we should consider doing in these chambers from now on is every time we spend $1 to go to war, maybe we should dedicate $1 for our veterans when they come back. Fair enough? We lose count of the money we send to war, but we count every penny that we send to the VA. And we squeeze them, and we tell them there's no more. There's always more money for war for some reason. Somehow there's always more money for war, regardless of what the economy is, regardless of how much revenue we have. There's always more money for war, but there's never enough money for us to dedicate to the veterans who need us, who didn't question us, who we helped them change their lives forever. And for some, they took their life once they came back home and realized that we are not there for them. I hope that we're all listening. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we're all listening. And thank you, Congresswoman Sinema, for this opportunity, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Representative Cardenas. I now yield to my friend and colleague from Southern Arizona, Congressman Ron Barber.